Okay, so this video that I'm recording is going to be the second of the Simone de Beauvoir discussion videos that we're recording for my online ethics course. So we've already recorded, we're kind of going reverse order. This was supposed to be the first one, and it's now the second one, but the way I'll post it, I still haven't decided. I guess on the website, this will come first, even though it was recorded second chronologically. So we're focusing on the beginning of chapter, chapter 3 of the Ethics of Ambiguity. So we in the other Simone de Beauvoir discussion, we looked at all the different, what we would call the what she calls disingenuous attitudes of, different ways that we how does she put it? Disingenuous attitudes of existence towards being. I can't remember the full phrase. I usually just use the shorthand. Disingenuous attitudes. That's not how you spell disingenuous. That's how you spell disingenuous. Okay. That would be the subman, the serious man, the nihilist, the adventurer, spell that right, and then the passionate man. That was the last of the different attitudes, and all of these were worth criticizing for her in the sense that they weren't honest about their freedom. And what was it about their freedom that they weren't honest about? Well, it was one of these two elements, right? So there's this phrase, freedom and its gratuity. Okay, so this is all the stuff that we focused on in the other Simone de Beauvoir lecture. This is stuff from chapter 2. We also talked in the third video, the one that's after this, we talked about the second half of chapter 3, where she talks about oppression and why we should care about oppression in others, and why, we have a sort of moral obligation if we are honest about the tenets of existentialism, or just, even if we're not existentialist, if we're honest about what she's calling freedom and its gratuity here, that we have a sort of obligation to help others who are oppressed. Otherwise, we're just as bad as the oppressor. And then we talked about the methods of going about alleviating oppression, and we mentioned her arguments, as well as we looked at the arguments of people like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. So now we're kind of backing up, actually, and there's this short section sort of in the middle of the Simone de Beauvoir reading from her book Ethics of Ambiguity, where she's just finished talking about these disingenuous attitudes that that either don't engage with their freedom, like the serious man. They might use their freedom once to sort of pick one sort of ideology or one way of being, one form of seriousness, to use her language, and just stick with that. And so their freedom is sort of systematically denied in favor of this stereotype, ideology, identity that they've sort of just, picked up ready-made. The subman never even gets that far. The nihilist rejects its freedom, realizes they're free, but sort of doesn't want to engage in the world, but rather negates the world, holds disdain for those who take it seriously. And then the adventurer engages with the world and enjoys their freedom, but doesn't care about the other, right? Doesn't feel the gratuity of their freedom. Then the passionate man as well. They care about the things that they love, that are passionate about the things that they are pursuing, but this is at the cost of everyone else, right? They become a sort of, I call them the serious man on steroids. So these are all negative, these are all criticisms, you could say, of behavior that an existentialist such as Simone de Beauvoir would disapprove of. So what is the right way to engage in the world? An existentialist would never want to give you a sort of prescription. That kind of goes against their whole philosophy. What does Sartre say? Existence precedes essence, and you have to define what your essence is. But there's a certain attitude that one should have when one engages in the world, if one is to be honest of one's freedom, and all of these fail. So for her, if you're going to get the most out of life, if you're going to be honest about your freedom, if you want to expand freedom for yourself and for others, she's very specific of how we do this. And maybe, and this is what we could maybe get some discussion out of, maybe she's too limited. Maybe this list is too short. And I don't think she means it to be exhaustive. Maybe she does. I don't know. But she calls these, you know how she loves to use this fancy academic language. She calls all of these positive engagements with the world, positive uses of our freedom. She calls these indefinite, conquests of existence over being. And, you know, let me go ahead and I'm going to italicize the word existence and being, because I want to distinguish those when I explain this. But let me give you a list of what is she talking about. There are four types of these indefinite conquests. Again, these are positive uses of freedom, good ways to engage in freedom that we can all participate in, which give us something to do. It gives us to fill that hole, that lack at the heart of being that she talks about. But it also helps open up opportunities and possibilities for others. So here are the four she lists. And I'm going to open my book here in a minute and read the passages, but I think this is the order she gives them in. I might have them out of order, but I think the first one she mentions is science. And then she says technics. That's a British term. Since most of my students are in America, I'm going to put technology instead of technics. That means the same thing, what she's talking about. After that, she mentions art and then philosophy. So we're going to come back. We're going to look at all four of these and go over them individually. But in general, again, these are all ways in which the human individual can engage with being, as she calls it here, the world, the given, what is. We can engage with what is. Our existence can engage with what is, and we conquer it somehow. Yet the conquest is indefinite. So let's unpack that phrase, indefinite conquest of existence over being. We're kind of working our way backwards here. The existence over being part, let's knock that out first. Whenever an existentialist uses the term existence, you know they're talking about human existence. The word existence might mean the same thing as being to some people. If something exists, if something is, the same thing. But in the existential parlance, you could probably thank Heidegger for this. He's the one that uses he's the first that I can think of who uses this term existence in this very specific way. And it goes back to the Greek etymology. The Greek etymology exists, that prefix ek connotes a sort of projecting outward. And so we exist in that we project outward. We project out into the world. We project out into the future based on some past. So the way that we are is existence, and that is different from any other way of being. So when you hear the word existence, again, human existence, keep that in mind. So when we engage in science, technology, art, and philosophy, our existence engages, it conquers, it has this conquest over what is, what has being. I guess through science, we conquer what is through understanding it scientifically, what the causes of it are, the origins of it, these sort of things, understand its chemical nature. Technology, we take what is and we shape it for our needs, for tools, to go about our day, to build buildings and things like this. This is where we take the world of being and we shape it for our usage. Art, we take the materials of the world and we express our emotions and we, present works of beauty. And art, we contemplate what is philosophically, right, in the last of the four indefinite conquests. So that's the general idea. But why does she call them indefinite, I ask you, and if you're one of my students, I think there's quite a few of you here who have already we've already gone over this, some of you from my intro to philosophy class, so you already know the answer to this because you heard it in class. Don't chime in, but anybody else besides that, does anybody else have, why does she call science, technology, art, philosophy, what makes them indefinite? What is it about these disciplines, or whatever you want to call them, these activities? What is it about them that makes them indefinite? Why does she call them indefinite? I've kind of explained why it's a conquest of existence over being, that all, but why are they indefinite? The word indefinite, it can mean unclear, but there's another meaning of it. It's not always unclear. She doesn't mean it unclear. That's not what she means, but indefinite, there's another sense of that word. Nobody? All right, if you already know the answer because you were in class, you can chime in now. Why indefinite? What makes science indefinite, or art, or philosophy, or technology? What's indefinite about it?
I think it probably would have to do with, the evolution of, it's kind of that, there's not really an end, but a continuous, like, continuum of it, like a continuous change.
Right. Yeah, that's probably the most pithy way to put it. There's no end. Right? Like it's endless. The idea that there'll ever be an end to science is somewhat ludicrous. Right? There'll never be a day where like all the scientists get together and like, oh crap, I guess we solved every question. We now have all the answers. And then science just stops, right? They publish 100-volume all the science answers, and then just retire, right? That's not how it works. In fact, the way it works, you're a scientist, you create something, you discover something, you discover a scientific truth through experimentation, through, coming with a hypothesis, testing the hypothesis in a lab, trying to falsify it, proving that hypothesis, that being accepted by the scientific community. Once that process is over, not only do you get accolades for your, wow, you're a scientist, you discovered this thing, here's this award, whatever, but now you've opened up new areas of research that maybe previously didn't exist. When the engineer creates the rocket ship, not only do they create something that is, an accomplishment for the engineer, but it opens up new possibilities for others to now explore space with the rocket ship. So that's the point, right? These are endless, and not only do they give us something positive to do, something positive to contribute to, I guess what you might call this communal dialogue, for lack of a better word. So that helps us in our lives, but it also opens up opportunities and possibilities for others. Let me find the passage here in question. Again, this is pretty close to the beginning of chapter 3. And we skipped, some of you, if you're taking my class in Oregon, my ethics class, and you bought the book, some of you bought it, some of you just are using the PDF files that I posted. If you're using the PDF files, then no big deal. But if you're using the book, you might have noticed that we're skipping the first section of chapter 3 on the aesthetic attitude. We're going straight to the second section on freedom and liberation. So this is where all this material is coming from. It's on page 79 is the quote that I'm going to read. And this is, she's talking about science. And I feel like quite a few people have this intuitive understanding of science that is kind of in keeping with the attitude she's about to criticize here. I'm going to read the passage and explain the attitude. I think that a lot of scientists, if you push them on it, they're going to sort of give the answer that Andrea gave about science. And, oh yeah, it's endless, it's indefinite. But there's also at the same time a kind of contradictory view. that's kind of naive. I think maybe scientists not so much, maybe the general public sometimes holds this idea that science is going to somehow solve all our problems, um, or that science is always going to find justification in something outside of science, that it has to somehow become useful. And maybe you remember her criticism of the term useful from the previous chapter. What did she say about the word useful? Does the word useful have any meaning? Sorry, I prematurely muted myself. Does the word useful have any meaning that's absolute? She says no, but why is that? What's wrong with the word useful? What's the problem with the word useful by itself?
Well, is it like something's usefulness dependent on who is using it? Like something that might be useful to me might not be as useful to someone else.
Right, exactly. So the idea is, and this is the problem of the serious man. I guess the passionate man, maybe. Nah, I guess the passionate man doesn't care, right? The passionate man's like, I love this thing. You don't understand it. Only I get it. The serious man, she gives the example of the military man, the highway man, the colonial administrator, that they've got their idea that I'm going to build this fucking highway and it's just useful. And it's like, no, it's useful for your economic development. Like, you want this mass transit thing because you have this 8-year plan, but maybe it's not useful for the farmer that owns the land that you want to cut through. He's got crops or he's got cattle or whatever, right? So exactly, the problem that a lot of people have is that when they get too serious about themselves, they start to take whatever's useful for them or whatever they've been convinced is useful, they take that as just an absolute. And they don't understand that, like as she puts it, nothing is useful that's not useful for some human being, some existing human being. This is actually maybe something we kind of skimmed over. Maybe we should have talked about this in the lecture that when we were talking about MLK, Malcolm X, and Simone de Beauvoir. We didn't really spend much time on her arguments against the oppressor, but one of the arguments the oppressor makes is the progressive one, that, oh, well, sometimes some people have to suffer in order for society to progress. And she sort of admits that it might be useful, quote unquote, to oppress certain groups in order to construct big monuments. But what is the use of the monuments if they're not being able to be enjoyed by humanity? So, I don't know why. I guess I just thought of this. There's an example. My buddy was just in Hawaii, and he was visiting, I think on Honolulu Island. The real estate there is super expensive. And he was taking one of those like touristy tour bus things where they drive through all the places and the guy's on the microphone pointing out stuff. And anyway, they drive by this huge skyscraper that's empty. And the tour guide says, that building is owned by Mark Zuckerberg. And he was sort of like melancholy about it, because he's like, he came in here, he built this building so that he can have this tax write-off, because the tax scheme in Hawaii is something where he can put his money in that building and just sort of let it just sit there and gather dust, and he can write it off as a tax write-off. But meanwhile, that neighborhood that he's in, where he builds this building, the whole neighborhood around it used to have surf shops and little cafes and little surfboard rental places and all these they all went out of business because the property value went way up. So it's sort of like he was sure, okay, so Mark Zuckerberg was able to build this really impressive skyscraper building. Isn't capitalism great, Yeah, but at what cost? He destroyed the real value of that neighborhood. On paper, it might have a higher value. On paper, it might be valued more by the market. But to the people living in that neighborhood, it's a freaking like a parasite. I don't know how else to put it. It's sucking value out of the lives of the people living there. I think, for her, I hate to call that oppression, because I don't think Zuckerberg's like, let me see how I can screw over the people of Hawaii. He's just listened to his freaking tax lawyer. Hey, Mark, you can buy a building here and no one would know, and you can write off $1 million and just keep it in your file. Okay, I'll do that. He's not thinking about the surf shop or the whatever, So we got to keep this in mind. Useful is not some absolute. Useful for Mark Zuckerberg's tax write-off, sure. Useful for society? I don't know, maybe not, right? So science finds itself in this position where it's forced to try to justify itself as useful, and she talks about this. And the way this often happens is that science will use technology as a justification. Well, we can spend all this money on this scientific research that your average person doesn't understand. They don't understand physics and chemistry, so they don't really understand why are we doing all this stuff, right? I'm even myself like this, even though I get annoyed when conservatives complain about it. I complain about it myself. What are we doing up in space? What are we wasting all these tax dollars when people down here are hungry, So the scientists have to sort of justify their existence to the greater society at large. And how do they do this? Well, they have to sort of say, look, we can come up with all these great forms of technology that are useful. So she points this conundrum out. This is on, again, page 79, if you have the book. It says, science condemns itself to failure when, yielding to the infatuation of the serious, it aspires to attain being, to contain it, and to possess it. But it finds its truth if it considers itself as a free engagement of thought in the given, aiming at each discovery, not at fusion with the thing. That's kind of a passionate man obsession. I want to become one with the thing I love. Screw the world. It's just my scientific discovery, right? But it doesn't take the serious attitude either. It understands that this is a human institution. That if I'm a scientist, I may be passionate about it, but I'm not going to let that passion harden to the point of discarding the value of others, the gratuity aspect of my freedom. So we don't want to fuse with the thing, but we want to aim at the possibility of new discoveries. What the mind then projects is a concrete accomplishment of its freedom. The attempt is sometimes made to find an objective justification of science in technics or technology. But ordinarily, the mathematician is concerned with mathematics and the physicist with physics and not with their applications. So her first response is, well, usually the person that gets into science, right? If maybe there's somebody on the call. Are any scientists here? Anybody biology majors, chemistry majors? Any physicists? That's a rare one. No biologists. But let's just imagine if you are a biologist or a chemist or a physicist, what do you think makes those people go into those fields? Why would you want to study chemistry or biology or physics, do you think? What would compel you to do that? I guess you maybe you're just really smart and you're good at those things, and you have this idea that those types of learning that type of information, getting a degree in those fields would set you up for financial success, that you could get, be rich if you were a biologist or a chemist or something, or a physicist. But let's say money wasn't the question, and you were just looking for something to do. Why do you think you would choose physics or biology or chemistry?
Because I enjoy doing it.
Right. You don't, so you think maybe like the guy that invented the microwave, you think that when he was a kid, or maybe it was a woman, I don't know who invented the microwave, but that person, you think that like when they got into physics or engineering that they were thinking, man, I can't wait to be able to like nuke a pizza pocket one day, like maybe they did, right? But I'm thinking like most scientists love their, like you said, Kimberly, they're interested in it, they love what they're doing, they're somehow fascinated by chemistry or science. I don't get that, I never really was. I'm more of a liberal arts dude, and fine arts. I'm into creative arts, but for some people that is really compelling. So for her to say, she's like, yeah, well, for one, if you're trying to find a justification for science and technology, usually that's not why people get into science. It's because they have a wonder, a curiosity about the world around them, and they love to learn about it through a knowledge of nature and the natural world. And that's just a certain type of person. And that's why they love to do it. It's not so they could like figure out how to invent the next gadget. That to be fair, that might be another type of passion, right? Maybe the technologist is into fixing things and coming up with solutions, and that's another type of passion. But furthermore, she says, and this is kind of the other argument, if you're using technology as a justification for science, well, what justifies technology? And for me, this is the big kicker. Heidegger, who's a philosopher that we'll be talking about tomorrow, if you're interested. I've got my meeting tomorrow night. He was a philosopher who was very concerned with technology and the way it shaped our worldview, and the way it shaped the way that we engage with our fellow man, and the way that we, understand the world around us. And he was very concerned with technology. I share his concern, and I think she's sort of pointing out similar concern when she says that technology is seen often as objectively justified. I hear in the media all this talk of technology with very little critique of it. And, so I know when I bring this point up, some people are, what do you mean? People aren't that naive. And I don't know. I mean, I think maybe they're not when you like, after they've just got done watching like Ex Machina or something, or some science fiction nightmare like Black Mirror or something. But I think in a general everyday thing, when you watch the news and they're reporting on some new development of technology, it's always like it's just the underlying assumption, the sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? The sort of subtext is that this is good, right? Isn't this amazing? Wow, isn't this so cool? Like, for instance, maybe some of you have been watching the news lately, and you've seen the latest announcement. I hate to keep picking on Mark Zuckerberg, but it's just coincidence that example popped up. But he's in the news now talking about the metaverse, or they're changing the name of Facebook to Meta. And the idea is that you're gonna have people with goggles on and inside this virtual reality. And again, I think people are just like, isn't this cool? This is the future of the internet. This is the social media future. Wow, Facebook is reinventing itself. Neato. And I was watching the news last week about this, and I saw like 3 or 4 stories on this thing, and it was like the third or fourth one. Finally, they had some people talking afterwards, and they got to like the third guy, and he was finally, somebody's like, does anybody else like think this is crazy? Like, this is nuts. Like, what's going to happen to us? I don't know. Maybe I'm just an old fuddy-duddy, and I need to put the goggles on and shut up. But I'm concerned with this, right? Because and what's the problem with technology? She has something to say here. She says, if technology itself is not objectively justified, furthermore, technology itself is not objectively justified. Technology, just because something is faster, it can do more, is automated, that doesn't necessarily mean good. That's not the same thing, right? It just means faster, more, faster processing speed, does more stuff at once. Multitasking is not necessarily a good thing, right? Sometimes you do shit half-ass if you do 5 things at once when you could have just done 1 at a time. So anyway, I'm digressing. Let's get to her critique of technology. So science can't really justify itself using technology because technology isn't objectively justified. If it sets up, she says, if technology sets up as absolute goals the saving of time and work, which it enables us to realize, and the comfort and luxury, which it enables us to have access to, then it appears useless and absurd. For the time that one gains cannot be accumulated in a storehouse. It is contradictory to want to save up existence, which in fact, the fact is it exists only by being spent. There's a good case for showing that airplanes, machines, the telephone, and the radio do not make men of today happier than those of former times. But actually, it's not a question of giving men time and happiness. It's not a question of stopping the movement of life. It's a question of fulfilling it. If technology is attempting to make up for this lack, which is at the very heart of existence, it fails radically. But it escapes all criticism if one admits that through it, existence, far from wishing to repose in the security of being, thrust itself ahead of itself in order to thrust itself still farther ahead, that it aims at an indefinite disclosure of being by the transformation of a thing into an instrument and at the opening up of ever new possibilities for man. So that was quite a wordful there, quite a mouthful there. But what she's saying here, we've got two approaches to technology, one that she disapproves of and one that she approves of. She seems to say that, look, technology can do this thing that is kind of useless and absurd. It can just help us have more leisure time so we can just do nothing. Well, if we've got nothing to do and we do nothing, then we are nothing. And that sucks. So if technology is trying to fill up this lack that's at the heart of existence, it fails, as she puts it, radically. But if it opens up ever new possibilities for man, then for her, it's beyond criticism, it's beyond reproach. Then it's a good, positive, expanding use of our freedom. So what could be an example of maybe a good use of technology that opens up possibilities versus a bad use of technology, one that tries to fill up this lack at the heart of existence that we all feel as a human being? We have a lack, we exist, we project outwards, we exist, we project forward into the future, we care about ourselves and we have concerns and we have this notion of self-identity. That's the type of beings that we are. Given that lack, we want to fill that lack. How does technology do this? How does technology try to fill that lack? She doesn't like it when it does this. Well, I gave this example. Some of you that are here from my intro class have heard this example, so my apologies for being repetitive, but here we are. I have a friend I haven't seen since high school or just out of high school who apparently fills this lack at the heart of his existence by online gaming, right? He never goes out. He just plays role-playing games on the internet. My friend was visiting San Antonio and invited him out to have a few drinks. And he's like, no, sorry, I've got a wedding to go to, but the wedding was a virtual wedding, so he's living this sort of virtual life. I saw someone raise their hand, but then she disappeared, I think. Brenda, are you still here? I guess she was raising her hand because she was like being disconnected or something. Oh, help me. It was like a hand of help or something like this. But yeah, so the idea is that instead of like going out into the world and engaging with real people and real concerns, he opts out for this sort of fantasy life, this kind of virtual life. I don't think de Beauvoir would approve of this use of technology, whereas something like the way the printing press, this is an example of technology that maybe pros and cons, but if we weigh the pros and the cons from an existentialist perspective, there'll be more pros than cons, because historically, once the printing press is invented, literacy rates skyrocket. More people can read, more people can afford books. So there's more ideas being discussed, more possibilities for freedom. So I think something like the printing press would be, a form of technology that in the long run, sort of taken as a whole, would be a good form of technology that expands freedom. But what do you think she would say? She did not live. Oh, sorry, just dropped something. She didn't live long enough to really see the advent of the digital world. The internet was barely being created. It was just sort of a messaging service amongst computer nerds when she died. Actually, I think that was even after she dies. She died in 1986 or something like that. So she wasn't around to see the advent of the World Wide Web, the internet. What do you think? Do you think she would have approved? You think, for her, the internet, is this something that is expanding the possibilities of our freedom? Or does the internet just fill a lack? And instead of doing something with our lives, we just, fill a lack online or something? How do you think she would respond to this form of technology?
I think for if looking at it as like a student, that you have easier access to the information that you need, you can do things like have the information from professors across the country, or have the information from sources that you normally wouldn't be able to have. But then also looking at it as just a regular person, social media and things like that do take up a lot of our time, and it just is just a distraction that takes you away for hours and makes you have no production. So she wouldn't like that aspect of it.
Yeah, I think I agree. I guess I would only add, I guess if you were going to be a complete Luddite who's just anti-technology or whatever, you could even argue against what you just said. I think you're right, though. But I think what you said at the beginning about how, as a student, it allows you to have easier access to information that you might not have had in the past. But some old school person might argue, but you'd have that access in the past. You had to go to a physical library. And if you went to a physical library on campus, you'd interact with people. You'd meet the librarian. You'd learn how to look up books. You get better at learning. It'd be harder to take up more of your time, but it'd be more fulfilling. It'd be more of an interaction, a more meaningful experience for you, a more tactile experience. So, but I think your point still stands, though. I think, even though they're kind of right about that, there is something to going to the library, sitting in a quiet room with other students who are also looking at their, doing their research. There's something about that atmosphere that you really can't replicate by just Googling it. So I kind of get that. But I think to sort of back up what you said, you might have access to things that your school library doesn't have. Information from another source, another database, another country. Maybe you could actually, if you're doing research on something that's political or a current event, you could maybe even use social media, even though I think you're right. A lot of people use social media as a distraction or as a fake life, a kind of virtual life, but you could actually use it productively. You could use social media to try to interact with people across the world, meet people who are struggling with the political situation, and try to understand them as a reporter, as a journalist, as a student, that kind of thing. So I think it's a kind of a mixed bag, I guess. So what else did you say? Yeah, I think that kind of touches on it. Kimberly, you're about to jump in, I think. Did you want to say something? I saw you unmuted yourself for a second. Anybody else have any ideas what she would say about the internet? Yeah, I think too, the last point you were making about the social media, I think it lends itself to disingenuous attitudes, to use her phrase. And I mean that broader than she does, right? She has the specific, the subman, but I mean, just being fake, right? I mean, you're just disingenuous. You're always going to be putting this best version of yourself online. And you've got this sort of online persona, which is fun, I guess. It's creative, you could argue. Maybe it's sort of artistic. But if that's it and that's your life, that's pretty flat. That's pretty thin. That's pretty abstract. That's not very concrete, to use the word that she likes to use. She talks about the concrete thickness of human existence. And I think you lose that in the sort of social media world. What about art? I guess art and philosophy, we can kind of tackle these both together, I suppose. The idea is, just like with science and technology, the artist, the philosopher, is not aiming for some end state. There's not going to be some work of art that is the ultimate work of art that ends all art. It's not like artists are they're all trying for this one piece and kind of failing. And one day this one artist is going to come along and she's going to make this piece of art. And once she does it, all the other artists are, she did it. Okay, it's over, right? No more painting, sculpting, or doing any art, right? No, that's not how it works. An artist creates something. It inspires others. They create something. And this art might, it might be similar, right? So you might get, like the British invasion in the 1960s. If you follow, the history of pop music and early rock and roll, the early, like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and all these British bands and the Who and them and Van Morrison and all that. They were influenced by the blues musicians from America in the from a decade before. They were coming out in the 60s. They were listening to stuff from the late 50s from like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and all the Sun Studio stuff, the Delta blues. That shaped their rock and roll. They kind of mixed this rock with blues, and that led to sort of the 60s psychedelic stuff. And that influenced even some people like James Brown, right? So you have, the Black musicians of the 50s, like the Muddy Waters, influencing these white musicians, the British invasion, the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones kind of influencing what became like funk and soul. Like, James Brown was his earlier music was a lot more, just regular soul music. And then it kind of shapes into something more funky, And then obviously James Brown influences white music in the 70s and the sort of disco era. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. So there's this sort of dialogue amongst these musicians and artists. And again, the idea is not to like, okay, well, I created this perfect form of music and that everybody just copies me. And that's the end of music. No, there's a sort of back and forth, a sort of dialogue, a sort of conversation, and an opening up of possibilities. Paul Gauguin creates primitivism and influences Picasso and the Impressionists, and that shapes the views of some of the early abstract expressionist painters, and that opens the door for a sort of backlash of the hyper-realists, and it goes on and on. So the history of art is just like the history of philosophy in a certain sense, that you have a sort of conversation of styles and a sort of learning off of each other. And this is beautiful for her. This is an expansion of possibilities. The way she talks about it, and this is very existential, that art should, I forget her exact phrase, but how does it go? Art should present existence itself as a reason for existence. And this is what many of the existentialist filmmakers did in the early 1960s, the early to the late 1960s, people like Godard You know, if you watch Godard's films, and also some of the Italian directors, like who's the one that does La Notte, the trilogy with all the, what's the guy's name? Not Fellini, and Antonioni. You've got all these Italian and French filmmakers who, you know, they're filming people in struggle with existence and nothing is resolved. These movies are very annoying to contemporary American audiences who are kind of used to expecting resolution at the end of the movie, right? The bad guy gets vanquished, the good guy, the hero saves the day and runs off with the girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, and everyone's happily ever after. Maybe there's a, you know, Freddy's claw comes up at the end so they can have a sequel. But other than that, there's like resolution. The existentialist films, no resolution, right? We end the movie mid-drama and we don't know what happened to Paula. She's waiting for Giovanni at the bus stop, and we know Giovanni's not going to show up because he's taken the train to the Alps or whatever, and we're like, what's going on? This is life. This is how life is. This is existence, you know, being presented as a reason for existence, not some fantasy perfect world that we escape into. That's the basics of existentialist art. But there's this one topic I'd like to cover, because this video is being recorded for my modern, or not, what's the name of the class? It's ethical issues, or no, moral issues, ethics, moral issues. It's supposed to be contemporary moral issues. And so one of the topics, I'm trying to find my sheet here. Oh, here it is. One of the topics that I had listed that I want to talk about here at the end is, well, we could talk more about identity, and we could talk more about being authentic. I think we talked enough about freedom. Oh, well, collectivism versus individualism. I guess I'll save that for the end. So I lied. Sorry, this isn't the last thing. This is the second to last thing. Is anyone here familiar with the concept of cultural appropriation? Let me actually write this up here on the PowerPoint. This is a pretty recent term. I never heard the word used until maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm sure it goes back further than that. Some academic probably came up with it, you know, in the 90s, I'm guessing. Probably some English major. Or sociologist or something, or women's studies major, who knows? No one's familiar with the term cultural appropriation. What is it? Could you?
It's like, or from my understanding, it's like taking elements from other people's culture and just like claiming it almost, and not giving credit, I guess, to other people who actually, like, that's their thing.
Cool. I like that definition. In fact, I wish that that's because a lot, it seems to me that when people use the term, they mean it as just the first part of what you said. I forget exactly how you worded it, but the first part where you just said it's borrowing from other cultures and then stop. Like, that's what they mean. That's what they say it means. But what they really mean is what you just said. It's not just that you borrow from other cultures, you take credit for it. And I think, like, if that's what you do, that I would say it's bad. It's wrong. You know, like, that's not cool. It's kind of messed up. It's, you know, I don't know if it's immoral, but it leaves a bad taste in my belly, and it kind of annoys me. And I could see why somebody would have an issue with cultural appropriation if, like you said, it's, you know, you're borrowing from other cultures, you're taking credit for it, you're not, you know, maybe distorting it, kind of thing, or something like this, for your own means or your own ends. And if that's what it is, I would say, yeah, I mean, I can understand why you would criticize it, but just merely borrowing from other cultures, I think, is Like, what's wrong with that? I don't understand what's wrong with that, because I think there's some people, like, for instance, I'll give some examples. Or maybe, can you think of some, Desiree? Because the only one I can come up with is kind of a stupid example.
Well,
what would be an example of cultural appropriation that people don't like, that they don't approve of?
I've seen one on the internet, like, they claimed like basically like bonnets, like, and then like made it like, and then made it like cost like like $100 or something, when you can buy like the beauty supply store and say, oh, this is like some whatever. But I think the problem comes where you can't really tell if, because like some people do like to assume and then just say, oh, like they're appropriate, but maybe because I feel like cultures should be like, are to be like appreciated, so like, and they're like to be shared. So then, but some people like, it's hard to tell whether they're appropriating or they're appreciating it sometimes.
Yeah,
I have another one.
Go ahead. Yeah, Kimberly. Yeah.
So one that happens like every year is on Halloween. So like so many costumes are basically like people's culture.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about the Halloween thing. You know, like I can see the argument. I can kind of understand it, like, especially if it's a stereotype, like a very unflattering stereotype. But like there's like you're not supposed to dress up as Pocahontas now. Like, you can't do that because it's disrespectful to Native Americans. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know enough about Pocahontas. I never saw that movie, and I don't really know the historical. I'm sure it's not historically accurate or whatnot, but I just don't like, just like to dress, maybe because it's like her dress is it's a wholly Native American, like the type of outfit she wore was a Native American royalty or something, and that it has holy or sacred meaning. I guess I could see that, but I don't know. I don't know. I'm not buying it. And I think, like, Desiree makes a good point. It's hard. Like, how do you know whether someone is appreciating or taking credit for, or just ripping something off? Or sometimes it's just coincidence, you know, like they just did something you happen to do at the same time, you know, like I remember, well, this I think is kind of cultural appropriation. I don't remember this. I remember watching a video about it on YouTube. I think it was more of a thing in the UK. So maybe that's why I don't remember this fad, but apparently there was a big fad going on a few years back of white girls wearing cornrows in their hair. And I think it was a bigger thing in the UK, but a lot of people were saying, well, that's cultural appropriation, that white women should not be able to put cornrows in their hair because that's a black thing. Only black women are allowed to do their hair in cornrows. And I thought that was kind of ridiculous, to be honest with you. I just don't see the big deal. I don't think white girls look that good with cornrows. I think it kind of doesn't really work. I've never really seen, like, it kind of looks good on a black chick. I don't, it just kind of works with their aesthetic, I guess, but I don't see it. Yeah, Desiree, do you want to add to that? Yeah.
To the cornrow, a lot of people like started calling them boxer braids, and I think that's where a lot of like people started getting upset about it.
Oh, they changed the name. Okay.
Yeah, and cornrows have like a history to them too, so it's like,
right,
they call it boxer braids was one of the issues.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of can relate to this somewhat, because I remember when I was in high school, I guess I kind of went freaky in about 7th grade or so, you know, and I started growing my hair long. I started listening to punk rock music and all this stuff. And I remember, you know, a lot of people would make fun of me. You know, they were like, you freak, you weirdo. You know, this is when, like, I guess Nirvana got really big in like the early 90s, and I was in middle school and high school. And, you know, I was a freak, is what they called me, a freak, little grunge wannabe kid or whatever, a little punk rock grunge kid. But when I became a senior, I think it was like my junior or senior year in high school, Marilyn Manson got huge, right? Like, Marilyn Manson became like a top 40, you know, he hit that song, Sweet Dreams or whatever, that cover song, like that was huge. And so all these kids that used to be preppy or jocks that used to make fun of me, they started dressing like Marilyn Manson and wearing these freaky shirts, you know, Marilyn Manson t-shirts and Nirvana t-shirts. And then they started being all cool to me, like, hey, what's up, Travis? And I'm like, what? Like, you used to make fun of me and pick on me. Like, I was pissed, you know, like I didn't, and we would always get mad too whenever like my friends would see like a jock or a preppy person wearing a punk rock t-shirt, you know. We still like today like roll our eyes at like Hot Topic, you know. Sorry if any of you
So,
yeah,
yeah, that would actually relate to the example you gave earlier of the cornrows, because people get made fun of because of the cornrows when they have it, and it's Black people that have it, and they make fun of them, and they even don't get certain jobs because of them. They want them to have that straighter hair. To them it looks messy. So obviously, same as you, that you got mad with the other people started to wear the same as you. They obviously, it's not right. They're like, what's
yeah.
up, bro? Why, you know?
No, that's a great point. I saw there was like some story on the news about like this woman. There's a Black woman who was a news anchor on some local news channel, and she would straighten her hair to look more, you know, like a white person's hair or whatever. And she said, you know what, I'm gonna stop doing that. Like, I'm gonna have my natural Black hair. And so she kept it. It was nice. It looked nice, but you know, it was curly and frizzy. And she sued them because they told her, they're like, you don't look professional, you need to start straightening your hair out. And she's like, what? Like that's messed up. And so, and I think that kind of like, I'm glad you bring that up, because in a way, like, I don't want to compare myself to that person. I think that's even more screwed up, but it kind of irks me because I remember when I was looking for a job as a teenager, all the places that would not hire me because I had long hair. And if I tried to dye my hair some weird color, I couldn't work there. And now I go to Walmart and Target and I see these kids with like pink and purple hair. And like, it's kind of petty though. Like, I should be happy. I should be like, you know, cool, man. Like, they have more freedom than I did. You know, when I was a teenager, I couldn't get a job. And I had to, when I finally did get a job, they made me put my long hair up in my hat so people didn't know I had long hair, because they might get offended that a long hair was making their burger for them or something. And so I should just be like happy that we live in a world now where kids don't have to do that. But I still, to me, it's kind of petty. But I think to Desiree's point, if someone's taking credit for something, that's why I think, you know, it's kind of, yeah, as much as I like Elvis's music, I think it's okay to hate on Elvis, because Elvis kind of gets credit for inventing some shit he didn't invent. He's not really the father, the king of rock and roll. He ripped off a lot of Black music, and maybe it's not his fault. You know, his manager probably has a lot more fault to do with it, but he should have given a little bit more credit to those, you know. But to say that like no one can ever borrow from anyone else is kind of, to me, that's just ridiculous, you know. I think it really depends on I forgot the words you used, Desiree, earlier. It's like, are you really appreciating it? I think that's what you said, appreciating it, or are you appropriating, right? There, I guess, is the difference, you know. And so, and she, you know, she brings this up because she's not, you know, a lot of, you know, she's considered a political leftist. And so a lot of her critics are going to throw her in the camp with she's just a communist, socialist, or whatever. And to a certain extent, they're kind of right. But she's not like some socialist, communist theorist, in that she thinks there is something important to tradition. That tradition is something very human, that it's important, but it has to be authentic. It can't be something that is just sort of fake and forced. Let me I'm going to try to find the passage where she's talking about this. This is on page 94, I think. Yeah. She says, we may be moved by dances, songs, and regional costumes because these inventions represent the only free accomplishment which was allowed the peasants amidst the hard conditions under which they formerly lived. By means of these creations, they tore themselves away from their servile work, transcended their situation, and asserted themselves as men before the beasts of burden. Wherever these festivals still exist spontaneously, where they have retained this character, they have their meaning and their value. So I guess if they're spontaneous, right? If Mick Jagger listens to Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and starts shaking his hips and like, man, this is good stuff, right? that's authentic, instead of him like, oh, those guys got, I could make money off that. I'll just change it a little to make it more marketable and make it more appealing and sort of force it into this sort of box that'll be, you know, more palatable for the masses. That's not true authentic expression. Wherever these festivals still exist spontaneously, where they have retained this character, they have their value and their meaning. But when they are ceremoniously reproduced for the edification of indifferent tourists, they've become no more than a boring documentary, an odious mystification. It is a sophism, it's bad logic. It's a sophism to want to maintain by coercion things which derive their worth from the fact that men attempted through them to escape from coercion. And then at the bottom of the page there, she says, at the heart, these oppressors know that these objects are less precious in themselves than as the manifestation of the civilization which they represent, right? So this kind of reminds me of when I was I grew up in San Antonio, and whenever I read this passage, I just can't help but think of the Riverwalk. Has anybody ever visited San Antonio and been to the Riverwalk? No? I don't. Yes. What is the Riverwalk? How would you describe the Riverwalk? Is it at the San Antonio Riverwalk? First off, is it actually a river?
No, it's kind of like a ditch.
Yeah. Don't say that to San Antonio, but yeah, it's a ditch. It's basically a ditch. But to me, it's very touristy. It's actually gotten a little bit cooler than when I used to live there. It was really bad when I lived there growing up. I used to call it Mexico for white people. In fact, that's kind of like, I was actually at lunch today at Lupe Tortilla, and my friend Kim was like, do you feel like you're in Mexico? I was like, no. I was like, I feel like I'm in Mexico when I'm at my house because I live in the barrio. I was like when I walk across the street to the taqueria across the street, then I feel like I'm in Mexico because no one's talking English. There's mariachis in there that are actually playing with soul, as opposed to going to the San Antonio Riverwalk, where you might see some mariachis, but it's my friend Susan, she used to work at the Marriott downtown in San Antonio as a bartender. She would talk about tourists, and they thought they were in Mexico because they're coming from like Wyoming or Wisconsin or whatever. They don't know any better, so you got this like Poindexter dad sitting there at the table. Oh, honey, look at that mariachi over there, Hey, come over here, Mr. Mariachi, play us a song, and it's like we're in Mexico, honey. And, the manager comes up to the mariachi and nudges him with his string and elbow, go play music to him, to those people. He's like, oh, sorry, yes, sí, senor. This guy's like from freaking Guatemala. He's like not even from Mexico, right? So it's fake. It's put up there for the tourist, for what they expect. It's a sort of sanitized version that's mass produced that lacks any life, I guess, right? As opposed to like this little dive across the street from me where you can get like the real deal Mexican food. Jesse, you were gonna jump in, and then Marty. Jesse, go first, and then Martina.
I think I think that kind of bothers me when I feel like they don't have like the whole story or like what actual, like the whole, like, how Dia de los Muertos is like right near Halloween and people dress up as like all the dress and stuff. But I feel like they miss out on a lot of the holiday because they don't have the whole.
Yeah, I think you're right about the Dia de los Muertos thing. And like, to me, that's every culture. Not every, but a lot of cultures have something similar to that. And we don't have that in the United States. And I think it's a beautiful holiday. But I think, like you said, because it's close to Halloween and they see all the Dia de los Muertos skulls and all the art, and they're like, oh, it's like just that's their version of Halloween. No, it's not. It's something completely. It's like it's a Day of the Dead. It's a day of remembering, you know, the loved ones that we've lost. You know, and I think that's a beautiful holiday. But I think you're right. And another thing you reminded me of is the Cinco de Mayo. They don't even celebrate that in Mexico. That's a thing that was invented by beer companies to like get people to go get drunk on May the 5th. So yeah, I think you're right. It's a good point. It's like one problem with it is it removes that the cultural practice from its purpose and its meaning. And in that sense, so yeah, I think that's a problem. Yeah, Martina, do you want to add something, or you had another example maybe?
I was actually going to talk about the same thing. Like Dia de los Muertos is very much like Americanized, and a lot of the time, like as a Hispanic who isn't Mexican, like a lot of time people are judgmental that they're like, you don't celebrate that, and we're like, well, no, because it kind of takes away our culture. So something that I've learned throughout the years is that people, it's like an unspoken rule in like the Hispanic community that it's offensive to call someone like Mexican, especially in Texas. It's offensive to call someone who isn't Mexican because of the general idea that if you're Hispanic, you're automatically considered that you're from Mexico. But Mexico is just one country out of so many Latin American countries. And as soon as we get assumed to be Mexican or assumed to be at a specific country, all of our home culture that we get from our countries, like that kind of just gets sucked out of us.
Right. Yeah. And I have to admit, I guess because I grew up in San Antonio, I'm kind of guilty of this in a sense. And I kind of blame my Mexican friends because and to be fair, San Antonio is majority Mexican, like descendant. Right. And so I think, but in a city like Houston, especially, right, or if you're like living in New York or something, you have to be careful, right, that you can't assume that just because somebody speaks Spanish or has a Spanish sounding name that you can assume that they're of Mexican heritage, right? They might be Guatemalan or Peruvian or, you know, Argentinian or all sorts of stuff. You know, I tend to use the word Hispanic is what I use. You know, if I don't know, I'll just say Hispanic, but even that might be assuming too much, because that means someone who you know, not speak Spanish, but their culture is a Spanish speaking culture. But Brazil, they speak Portuguese, so you call somebody Hispanic and they're from Brazil, that might not really quite work either. So I think, yeah, you're right, is that's what's offensive about, you know, in a way though, I we have to be careful though, because I think that a lot of people take that the wrong way. I think the way you explained it is perfectly, what's what I'm looking for, reasonable. It makes sense. And I think you have, your concerns are well-founded. And I think that, like as you said, that doing that kind of erases all these other countries and nationalities and other cultural practices by sort of just painting. People do this a lot with Asian Americans, you know, not so much anymore, at least I guess maybe because I live in Houston and it might be different other places, but I know growing up, you know, they just assume Chinese, you're from China, and even the word Asian, it could refer to somebody from India or from Pakistan. They're Asian as well, but we tend to think of Far Eastern. So there's a similar problem there too. I think when we try to label people and sort of with this broad general brushstroke, and their identity gets sort of washed away in the process. But on the other hand, I think there's another problem that I find is that the word Mexican particularly is understood as a slur. And I think that's going too far the other way. I think your point should still stand, and it's a valid point, you know, Martina. But this idea that, like, because I mean, I remember when I was working in Austin at Whole Foods, And my friend, who is Hispanic, who is of Mexican descent, used the word Mexican and said, yeah, I forgot what he said, but he said it in front of the manager. He said, "Oh, that's the Mexican in me," or "That's just my Mexican heritage," or he was talking about his buddy. He's like, "Oh, he's a Mexican, he'll deal with it, or he can handle it. He's a Mexican," or whatever. He said something like that, and the manager was like, "Oh, Mexican American, Mexican American." Like, most of my friends in San Antonio were Hispanic. Most of them were of Mexican origin, and they never used that term ever. They never used the term Mexican American. They always referred to themselves as Mexican, and they didn't think of it as a bad thing, right? But that's just like, I don't know. I find that that's kind of odd that people now, they think of, oh, it's negative to call someone Mexican, call them Mexican American. Well, what if they actually are Mexican? What if they're like visiting the United States and they're a Mexican citizen? Is it a slur at that point? I think we're being too careful with language sometimes. Like I said, Martina, I think your point is valid, and I think to a certain extent we do have to be careful with language and not overly assume things. But I think it could also go too far where we're like so careful with language that, you know, we turn things into bad words when they're just a descriptive word. You know, somebody from Mexico, I'm Irish, or I'm Irish descent. I don't really identify with my Irish heritage much. But if you said, "Oh, he's Irish," I wouldn't be like, "Oh, I'm Irish American." Oh, I just think there's bigger fish to fry. There's a lot more problems in society than that. But I could see how, like, if I were Puerto Rican or Dominican or you know, whatever, Argentinian, and people kept calling me a Mexican, I would be really offended and annoyed. I could see how that would, you know, get on my nerves. Definitely, you know, for
yeah,
sure.
I think I've never heard anyone get like offended about being called from like their country, because I've never heard the term Mexican American either.
Yeah.
I just find Hispanics to be like very like prideful of their country of origin.
Yeah.
And it might just be just the fact that I come from a really small Hispanic country that always does get overlooked. There's a lot of people do mix us up with like Argentinians just because we have the accent, but it's like, I'm not from Argentina, but we have similar accents. But it's just that instead of assuming, like, something that I experience a lot is I have a Hispanic name. So people are like, "Okay, well, you're Mexican." And I'm like, no, it's easier to ask, "Oh, where you're from," than to have the whole conversation of, "Well, no, I'm not Mexican," and having that like already be a border of like unsolid ground, you know?
Right. Yeah, you know what though? That's interesting. I like that you want them to ask you where you're from, but there's some people who would argue that that's an example of a microaggression. Are you familiar with that term? What a microaggression is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like asking someone where they're from is like, I don't understand. Like I think the problem with this whole political correctness debate is that the people who are super politically correct, they're not being honest about the way language works. You know, like, sure, if somebody asks you where you're from, it could be out of hostility, but it could also be out of curiosity and just a general interest in learning more about you. It depends on the context. It depends on how it's asked. You know, if somebody says, "Oh, you're interesting, Martina, so where are you from?" You know, that's a lot different than like, "Who are you? Where are you from?" I mean, those are different inflections. And so like, I think it's kind of, there's nothing wrong with asking where someone's from if it's just out of curiosity, right? You're just trying to find out about them. I honestly, the only problem I would find with that, I guess if you want to be nitpicky and you want to critique that question, is that maybe that really shouldn't be relevant, right? Like, that assumes that, oh, all Argentinians or all people from Bogota, from Colombia, or from you know, they're all the same. You know, that I don't know, like, to me that's just, if you get the nation right, does that really help much get at who Martina truly is? You know, like, just because where are you from, by the way? I probably haven't mentioned your country. It's the one that always gets forgotten.
I'm from Uruguay, so it's
Oh, okay, all right.
the small country in between the big countries.
Right. Isn't that where Jim Jones went? Or no, he went to Guyana. So Uruguay, you're Uruguayan, is that how you say it or whatever? Yeah. So yeah. This is one thing that kind of annoyed me, I guess, and I try not to be. I try not to be judgmental, but it's sort of when I was doing the dating apps, I remember seeing a lot of people on their apps, a lot of Hispanics. They don't put anything on their bio except for the country they're from. That's all they put. So have all these pictures of this woman, and then it just says from Colombia, from Argentina, and I'm just, I mean, maybe they only want to date other people from their own country, like, but still, like, I don't get it. Like, is everybody from that country the same? Like, am I supposed to know everything about you? Like, fill in all the blanks because you're from this country? I think in a way that sort of almost like opens the door for stereotyping, and in a way, I feel like maybe everyone's guilty of this. This is why I don't want to judge these women who do this. They're probably new to Houston. They're probably new to America, and maybe they're trying to find somebody that they can relate to. And they're assuming if you're from the country that I'm from, that we'll have something, at least something basic, a culture that we can sort of a base to relate on. So I can kind of see that. But in a way, I think the existentialists wouldn't like this, and this is maybe what irks it about me, is it's kind of an artificial limiting of one's possibilities. It's kind of an easy way out. Here you are in a new country, in a new world. Don't you want to explore, maybe learn a language, learn about new people and kind of new things? So I think you're almost shutting yourself off. That being said, I got to say, I was probably guilty of this myself when I was studying abroad. I went over to Germany thinking I'm going to spend a month here and learn as much German as I possibly can. And I found myself taking the easy way out. And I did learn a little bit of German, but not as much as I could have, because I was hanging out with all the other American students that were there, and we were all talking English, and we were going to places together. And instead of like forcing myself to try to hang out with more German speakers and try to speak more German, I kind of took the easy way out. So, again, I don't begrudge these women for doing what they're doing in their dating strategy, but I find that it's sort of like when it comes to like presenting an honest picture of one's individuality and one's uniqueness, just tying it to like one nation, to me seems sort of, I guess it's better than the problem you're talking about, where everybody just assumes you're from Mexico. That's even worse. But even when they get to Uruguay, are they much better, right? Isn't there something special about Martina that can't be summarized by just, explaining where you're from? So I guess that's all I would say to that. Where do we get our identity from, though, I guess, if not from, the places where we grew up and the cultures that we inhabit and these sort of things and other people. But I don't know. I feel like there's this kind of self-segregation that we all tend to do. We all tend to gravitate towards people who already sort of agree with us, that already have the same kind of interests that we have. And I guess this is natural, but because we have this natural tendency, maybe that is, we're shutting ourselves off from other possibilities that could present themselves otherwise. But anyways, I think I've exhausted, it looks like, the conversation here. Unless anybody wants to add anything to that, I guess we can go ahead and call it a day. Let me look at my sheet here. Did you want to say anything, Desiree?
Yes, I was just gonna say in my psychology class, we learned that is a natural thing to be attracted towards people who have similar ideas, and not necessarily like I like coffee, you like coffee, but more like the bigger like social opinions on social issues and stuff. And if you if you're trying to go somebody that has different opinions on like the bigger issues, then it just won't, I feel like it won't work.
Yeah.
You'll always be arguing.
I don't know. I think I disagree. Like, I mean, I think I agree with the psychologist who says that we have a tendency to do this, but I think it's healthy to, you know, I mean, I guess it depends on what you're talking about, right? Like if somebody says that murder is okay, I don't know if we can be buddies. You know what I mean? Like if somebody says that like abusing children is okay, I don't think we can be friends. But you know, just because somebody voted for somebody that I don't like, if there's other qualities about them, I think the ultimate thing is, are they a decent human being, right? Are they kind, right? Are they I mean, there's people that are kind and they're good people who have really stupid ideas politically. You know, like I've known people that are really, you know, I have had relatives, uncles and aunts who like, you talk about politics and you would hate them. You know, these people are fucked, but they're really sweet on a personal level, you know? And I think that, you know, I think you're right. I mean, there's got to be some big issues where like maybe, okay, like I'm not able to hang out with you because you're not going to be able to understand me. I'm not going to understand you. And we're just going to butt heads and probably just get angry at each other. So, I mean, maybe you're right. There might be some exceptions, but I tend to think those are rare. And that I think if, you know, it's healthy to surround yourself with people you disagree with, you know, because you need to challenge yourself. Otherwise, you know, you're just going to get set in your ways, and you don't really, you know, we talked about this earlier in the semester, not in our classes, but in this class I'm recording the video for. We were talking about John Stuart Mill and, you know, your liberty, your freedom to believe and to think what you want to believe. And he says, well, your beliefs are really nothing if they're not challenged. If you believe something just because it makes you feel good or because everybody else tells you to believe it, then that's not a very solid foundation. Your beliefs get stronger when they're exposed to other beliefs and they're confronted with disagreeing opinions, and you're able to confront those views and answer them, right? And for him, that gives you a much more stable foundation for your convictions. And I think it's just a healthy practice for a democratic society. And I think it's one of the problems with this country now is that too many people shut themselves off from people they don't agree with. And I hear it from, I have friends that voted for Trump. I got friends that voted for Biden. I got friends that didn't vote at all. And the ones that voted for the left and right, like, man, they can't, whenever they're like all together in the same room, I'm always worried they're going to bring up politics, because I'm like, they're going to like start killing each other because they're going to hate each other. And the things they say about the other side, I know are not true. I'm like, you're listening to only one side of the story and you're kind of distorting the other side. They're wrong and you've got a point, but I think you're kind of painting them unfairly. So, you know, I would say, yeah, maybe, you know, you got to be able to relate. You got to be able to understand somebody. But at the same time, it's important, I would argue as a philosopher, it's important to surround yourself with a variety of viewpoints.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I agree with that, because I feel like a lot of people that do surround themselves with the same people that have the same mindset, they don't have those conversations that someone might have with someone who has a different mindset than them, to be able to see their opinion and to see their viewpoints and then to come to an agreement, because we all have our opinions on things, but our opinions can change if we change our perspective. And I think it doesn't come with a screaming match. I think the most necessary part of it is that two people are sitting down with respect to each other's opinions and to each other's viewpoints, and they aren't too prideful to say, okay, I see where you're coming from and I see your perspective. Because once pride comes in and we're too prideful to say, yeah, I was wrong, then that's when the screaming match happens, and then you start to argue for something that you don't even believe anymore.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's actually a very existential way of looking at it. I mean, you didn't use existentialist language, but you know, what like Sartre would talk about, or even Simone de Beauvoir would say, you know, when you're engaging with the other, you're going to treat them as a subjectivity, not as an objectivity, right? And so we tend to treat the other that we don't agree with as an object. That's why it turns into these screaming matches, because once we find out what they believe, we sort of fill in the rest in our mind. Well, they believe X because of Y, Z, P, Q, and this, right? So, oh, they voted for Trump, therefore they must be a racist, homophobic, whatever. Oh, they voted for Biden, that they must be a communist, socialist, whatever. They fill in all these, they've made up their mind, and you're no longer a person, a subjectivity that has a mind that has come to their views through a certain engagement with the world. You're just this thing, this type of thing, this category. You fill these boxes. I don't like that. And you're not allowing them out. Once you talk to them and you hear their side, you still might disagree with them, but at least you'll be listening to the person, and you'll be trying to understand where they're coming from. Why did they arrive at their views, instead of just coming to that conclusion on your own? Oh, I know where you're thinking. I know why you think that. Well, do you really? Can you at least stop and listen? And maybe you're right. Maybe they are, thinking that, but you don't know until you ask, until you talk. And I think that because of this sort of knee-jerk response that some people tend to have when they are confronted with views they don't like, it makes a caricature out of their opponent. They turn their opponent into some cartoon character. There's sort of this image they have in their mind of the liberal or the conservative or whatever party they don't like. And that's just not constructive. It's not going to go anywhere. Like you said, it's just going to end up in some screaming match. And it really denies humanity. It denies a person their humanity. It doesn't give them their day in court. And you got to hear them out. So anyway, I guess I'll stop at that, unless you wanted to add something to that, anybody. No, nobody's got anything else they want to say? All right, well, it seems like a lot of y'all are pretty quiet. I'm glad Martina was here. Andrea, she had to leave early. She's usually pretty talkative. But yeah, Desiree, Martina, Jesse, thanks for chiming in and making this more of a discussion than a monologue. But anyway, I'll try to get this extra credit posted on the Blackboard site by Monday. And if I forget, let me know. Remind me to do that. But otherwise, let me stop sharing the screen. And then I'm going to stop recording. And geez, it's dark in here. Let me turn the lights on.
Hello?
Hello.
One more question. Did we?
Yeah, sure.
We have cross on